Hello, in this vlog I'll be documenting my physical transformation and my own developing practice based on my movement techniques learned and discovered throughout the rehearsal process of the stylized text in Raimondo, touching on the practitioners that influenced us and our prior work on movement through text. A huge amount of the process was succeeded by our prior work on character journey and text through movement, where, after all our work on text analysis, we would allow the weight of the words and our emotional connection with the text to carry us physically through the narrative and inform our movements with specificity. This was important for Raimondo, as this piece uses a lot of complex language and description, so the most important part in the rehearsal process was to not lose any significance in the language and instead find the language that could allow us to make informed movement choices. That way, we could lose ourselves in the narrative and explore a more in-depth stylized physical transformation and not think about myself, the actor, playing it. To begin the foundations of creating ensemble work, we looked at Anne Bogart's viewpoints to help build our unity as an ensemble through spatial relationships, kinesthetic response, and shape. We started with group exercises, first through the Complicité-inspired Stop and Go, described as a group awareness and concentration exercise which enhances peripheral vision and builds a satisfying sense of unity. The enjoyment comes from the sense of finding mutual agreement. No individual takes responsibility for leading, but a silent consensus emerges. The game specifically helped the group connect for a collaborative effort, as well as making reacting to our surroundings and one another second nature. We also utilised the walking on the grid exercise, building on it by altering tempos, levels and shapes and acting on impulse, moving away from our own internal pace and becoming comfortable with finding new ways of moving that we could place into our character and ensemble work. The grid involves skills of group awareness and discipline, concentration and trust, producing a performance style of neutrality. So not only was the performance space kept dynamic, but I felt safe in the space as our concentration was kept entirely within the marked out stage. These exercises allowed the ensemble to become one entity, breaking free and having our individual moments where we became our lead characters. For instance, in Chapter 1, after we became the menagerie of spiders, earwigs and flies, I would freeze the ensemble, breaking away to become the character of Mercedes, and the ensemble would then create a soundscape of a door knocking with their feet. This was to continue the idea of storytelling and emphasise the narrative aspects of the performance. To transition into this character, I took inspiration from mayflies by body rolling into the character of Mercedes and indicating a shift in tone. This snap effect allowed me to immerse myself in the character with quick succession, and I feel as though our intense work on building the unity, purpose and objectives of the ensemble helped create a larger differentiation internally and in the stakes when I became Mercedes. My physicality of Mercedes needed to be extraordinarily heightened to emphasise the idea that these characters were seen through the eyes of a 15-year-old boy, and to distinguish a vast difference between the life Raimondo is used to in the cellar and his curiosity and beauty he finds in the next chapter when he meets Azor. Referring constantly to the descriptor grotesque, I found a physicality reminiscent of a school caretaker or dinner lady depicted in children's novels, by allowing my body to feel internally what it is like to be grotesque. I naturally found a hunched back and a limp, wiping snot on my sleeves and scratching my behind, going to the extremes and finding the labour effort of press, both in the word grotesque and in the character. This was harshly contrasted with Azor's entrance in Chapter 2, where our reference word was swan, and we created a sweeping and wave-like motif to find grace and elegance as an ensemble. Using these reference words, we could find a heavier emotional contrast from fear to love in such a short amount of time, and finding examples of these emotions in the text to carry us into the feeling and inform appropriate movement. Another game that informed our approach was the Flock of Birds game developed by Jack Lecoq, where the group would follow the leader, creating each movement with specificity and impulse, and playing with tempos and rhythms different to our own. This helped as, by focusing on the natural tensions within your body, falling into the rhythm of the ensemble and paying attention to the space, you can free the body to move more freely and instinctively. Keeping the movement of the group and the leader in the peripheral vision and releasing any unnecessary body tensions helped that feeling of immersion in becoming one with the ensemble. This was particularly effective in staging scene 1, where Raimondo would read the articles in the Playboy magazines, and we wanted to make use of the idea of a sense of improvement and joy, where we would observe Raimondo's actions and create expressive motifs to reflect his thought processes, thus following the leader and removing the desire to stand out. We decided this route of physicalizing Raimondo's thought processes would be the main objective of the ensemble, to support the narrative and highlight key moments in the text, adding stakes and tension. I found this most significant in my portrayal of Edna in Scene 5, where I initially struggled with finding the heightened characterization of whom is described as a she-rhino and has a physicality very different to my own. I found my first initial shift in developing my character when Edna is charging at Raimondo with rhino-like monomania, and we staged it so that the ensemble was marching towards Raimondo with me, increasing in speed and weight in the footsteps to create a soundscape. This integrated our work on the Flock of Birds game, where this time I was the leader, and found that the energy I brought into the scene was inherently absorbed by the ensemble, and so, if I intensified the characterization, the group naturally did too. This is the pivotal moment of the play, so once I found the weight in my stride, the energy was received by the group, and the subconscious relationship we had established prior built up the tension. I internalised this energy and used it as a future reference point when portraying Edna earlier in the scene, using it as a starting point, raising the stakes and heightening the character, and only building from there. We focused on readability to the audience through our work on shapes, as an idea that might initially seem like the most creative might not be translated to the audience as we intended. For instance, in Scene 1, the ensemble became the swollen ankles and sensible shoes of passing commuters. My initial idea was heading in the right direction, but wasn't dynamic enough for the description in the text, so I looked at Bogart's work on shape and altered my duration and tempo of movement. I noted back to our work on topography, or the onstage pattern or design the movement creates, where we would create expressive shapes and move them around in varying repetitive patterns, adding a layer of interest and making the performance bolder. Once I found that, I added syncopation to my footsteps and worked on a blank canvas idea for the upper part of my body to draw focus solely to the feet. Similarly, we played with a lot of silhouetted imagery behind a backlit sheet in Scene 4, so an awareness of our bodies was crucial so that even without expression, it was clear exactly to the audience what was happening. Spatial and physical awareness helped us to unblur the shadows and create a readable and authentic image using our work on viewpoints. Having learnt a significant array of movement techniques prior to beginning rehearsal, it put myself in a good place to delve deeply into the movement beneath the text and experiment and play with confidence. Building an awareness of my body to ease the readability of my movements allowed me to find more simple approaches and not think too hard about trying to be abstract or metaphorical, and kept the cohesion of the group imagery as to not stand out. In future, my next steps would be to find a specific order that helps me immerse myself in a character immediately, like in the case for Edna. But now that I know which steps work best for me, I just need to put them into practice.